Jazakallah khair, Sister Zerqa. Inshallah, the next paper is on building a Muslim political network, organizing socio-political gatherings, conducting workshops and seminars, which will be presented by Sister Safiya Ghori, who is the director of MPAC's Government Relations, MPAC being Muslim Political Affairs Council, in Washington, D.C. She earned a joint JD, Juris Doctor degree, and Master of Arts in May 2006 from the University of Arkansas. Safiya regularly meets with the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI in order to implement policy recommendations that provide guidance to both the government and the Muslim American community on civil rights and counterterrorism issues. Additionally, she has authored legal and policy memoranda, briefing papers, and press releases on counterterrorism strategy, radicalization, immigration reform, human rights issues, and U.S. domestic and international policy. Under Safiya's guidance, the MPAC DC office has launched Activate 08, MPAC's policy guide to the 2008 elections, which serves as a reference on issues ranging from national security to healthcare.
So who would have guessed that 8 years after 9/11, we would have our first African-American president whose middle name is Hussein? Or who had a Kenyan father who was raised as a Muslim? Who would have thought that we would not only have elected our first Muslim member of Congress, but that we would have two Muslim members of Congress, Congressman Keith Ellison from Minnesota and Congressman Andre Carson from Indiana. I think we're all aware that the election of, that Barack Obama's campaign at this election with the various Muslim members of Congress and such a great platform would have inspired young Muslim leaders to get more involved and organized around some of these socio-political issues, and really by harnessing the internet and social media. American Muslims, and I'd like to start by sharing a few stories before I get into best practices. American Muslims from all corners of the country came out to support their candidate of choice. And in Ohio, for example, I met a young 16-year-old boy named Daniel Hussein, who would leave school every day at 4:30 to volunteer at the Obama office in Ohio. On November 4th, Daniel could not even vote, but he had spent over 2.5 months knocking on doors and making calls. And there's no doubt in my mind that he influenced this past election. And what I realized over time is, we see so many negative stories. We hear, that Muslims aren't, plugged in, they're not participating, they're not coming out and voting. But I feel like these are the stories that are not rare, and they embody the true American Muslim spirit. So I met all of these people, and I experienced during this election, I experienced all of this when the Muslim Public Affairs Council launched Rock the Muslim Vote, which was basically a mechanism for organizing young American Muslims around the country to get involved. We held more than 40 election town hall forums. We held debate watch parties. We distributed Activate 08, the voter's guide, which was like a policy guide on many issues. And we sort of put out the platform issues for the candidates. We also offered, like Zerqa, we offered rides to polls. We did Muslim phone banking, which we called voters. We reminded them to register to vote. But we get to the question, and this is what I get often, is how do we get our community involved? How did all of this happen? How are we able to build a Muslim political network and organize successful events around the election? I think at MPAC, when we were strategizing, how are we going to get young people involved, and how are we going to get the American Muslim community plugged in? And we really took example from the Obama campaign when it came to social networking. His texts, which many people received, throughout the months of the campaign, Twittering, which I'm not even sure how to do that, but I know that that method is used and is leveraged in a great way. And so what we did was, we regularly sent out emails, and we were able to send weekly updates on our events, where they were located, who would be there, and we had arranged for both both campaigns, both presidential candidates, their representatives to attend our forums. So sometimes we would have heated discussion, because while we didn't have the candidates, we had their representatives. At the Adams Center, I distinctly remember Jim Zogby, who was representing President Obama, and we had someone else who was a Clinton, another ambassador of some sort, who was a Clinton representative, and we didn't end up having a representative from the McCain campaign, and it was the most spirited debate, and you would be surprised that it wasn't on civil rights, it wasn't on national security, it was on the environment, which was enlightening to me because it shows that our community is concerned about these issues. So going back to social networking, we were able to really leverage these emails and that sort of technology to reach out to people. Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, you've probably heard of Facebook. You know, I think when we first started this, I was really skeptical about how we would reach out to people via Facebook, but because we had so many people with different networks of friends, our emails and our events were circulated to thousands of people who may not have even heard of MPAC or didn't even know about this campaign. So we were able to really leverage Facebook by sending out e-bites to networks of other people's friends. YouTube. Again, before this campaign, I had no idea how to upload video on YouTube, but it's actually quite simple. And we were able to videotape many of our events, many of our phone banking events, and we put it on YouTube. And it energized people because they were able to see and hear what we were doing. And they felt like they were a part of that atmosphere. And finally, we used blogging. And it resonated a lot of buzz around our events and what we were doing because she was blogging. We would have a forum, we would do a phone banking party, a debate watch party, and she would be blogging about the event, who was there, what was happening, who said what, and it really created a sense of excitement. My second, beyond social networking and using the media is about empowering people. By providing various methods of ways for people to participate in our community, MPAC offered a lot of support to committed volunteers. We tracked volunteers and gave them the tools to activate others. Because a staff of 15, while we wish we could be everywhere, we can't. And we were able to activate people and train the trainers to go out and do what we were doing. We selected coordinators in Ohio, Virginia, and Pennsylvania who were able to mobilize their communities with our training materials. So we provided the materials, and they did the work. We also encouraged various methods of participation. It wasn't surprising to me that at our town hall events, we found that the people who were attended were usually of an elder demographic, while our phone banking events and our debate parties were usually younger members of the community or younger Muslims. And one of our most successful organizing tools was to allow for these groups to organize their own networks and supporters the way that best suited them. So for example, my sister held phone banking parties at her house, in her living room. Sitting from her living room, she would access our database, use our lists, and would call people around the country and remind them to vote, make sure they're registered, and this is a convenience that people can do from the comfort of their own home. The next thing that I found was really interesting was connecting like-minded people. Sometimes we think we attend the same masjid, we go to the same mosque, we go to the same community, but really connecting people who care about similar issues is a really interesting phenomenon. I would see at our debate watch parties very spirited debates about healthcare or immigration reform. And then at the end of the session, I would see the people who were really interested in healthcare, the people who were really interested in immigration reform, would go off and they would talk about ways to further mobilize on an issue basis. So we really connected like-minded people, through these debate watch parties and these discussions. Lastly, we advertised in local community papers in various languages. And like Zerqa mentioned, we found that when we were able to put an advertisement, for example, in the Urdu paper or the Somali paper or the Arabic language paper, we had a network of people who just weren't on our email lists. They were coming in and this was the first time they were hearing of MPAC, and they had access to our information because we reached out to them in their local papers. And when we were, I actually was wrong on this. My colleague Arif was talking to me and said, we really need to do this, we need to use ethnic media. And I said, who actually really looks at those papers, and because I always see like copies of the Muslim Link and these papers. Many of these papers have 40,000, 50,000, members who are reading their paper, and they are actually accessing that information. So that was one of our really successful tools that we used. And I think at the end of the day, we all hope that these sorts of forums and these sorts of events become more common. you know, maybe 10, 20 years ago, we didn't see members of Congress coming into our mosques. We didn't see this dialogue taking place in our community centers. And you know, I really hope that it'll be less contentious for a candidate, you know, in 5, 10 years to be at our mosque and to speak to our communities, and not just the local, you know, city council or, you know, the local governance, but really maybe a presidential candidate or a senator to visit our mosque and to ask community members for their vote. And so I really do hope that that's the next step for this, and I look forward to your questions.